A Navy SEAL brought home a dog that flinched at every sound, as if the world had already broken around her too many times. He didn't see a difficult dog. He saw a wounded heart that had never learned what safety sounded like. So he changed his house, his footsteps, even the way he closed a door, just to help her breathe easier. And little by little, the dog no one wanted began to stay. But one stormy day, her fear turned into something else, a warning. Because the very thing that made her seem broken was the thing that heard a neighbor's cry for help. Where are you watching from? And how did this story make you feel? Please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subs so we can keep sharing more stories like this. Winter did not come to the little coastal town with grandeur. It came the way old grief came, quietly, without asking permission, settling into wood and bone until everything carried a faint ache. By late afternoon, the sky over Blackwater Cove had turned the color of worn tin. The sea beyond the harbor was not wild, only endless and tired, folding itself over and over against the rocks with the patience of something that knew time would outlast every human promise ever made beside it. Wind moved through the streets in long, cold breaths. It rattled porch chains, pressed against weathered siding, and found every place a house had forgotten to protect. Evan Brooks crossed Harbor Street with his shoulders slightly hunched, not because he was weak, but because he had long ago learned how to make less of himself in bad weather. At 56, he still carried the broad frame of a man who had once spent years trusting his body more than his thoughts. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and then farther than he had noticed. His face held the kind of stillness people often mistook for hardness. It was not hardness. It was economy. He had spent too much of his life around noise to waste words now. He had lived in Blackwater Cove for almost 7 years. That was long enough for people to know his name, long enough for them to nod when they passed him in the grocery store or at the bait shop, long enough for them to understand that he was not unfriendly so much as inaccessible. He fixed things when something broke. He salted his front steps before ice could form. He returned shopping carts. He donated quietly when someone's medical bills got too high. But he did all of it in the same way he repaired the loose boards on his porch, with efficient hands and no interest in being watched. The pet rescue sat at the far end of the street between a hardware store and a laundromat whose buzzing fluorescent sign had been half dead for years. Evan had passed it more times than he could count. Sometimes he glanced through the front window out of habit, seeing movement, cages, bowls, the soft blur of animals waiting for people who might never come. A week earlier, he had noticed a dog there. He had only seen it for a second, a shape low to the ground near the back wall. Dark coat, narrow frame, head lifted but body pulled inward as if bracing against something no one else could hear. He had walked past. Then he had walked past again 2 days later. And again that morning, when wind drove salt and sleet across the road, and he had told himself he was only looking because the window was lit. Now, as another gust pushed hard at his jacket, he turned without fully deciding to and stepped inside. The bell over the door gave a thin metallic ring. Heat met him first, uneven and slightly stale. Beneath it came the layered smell of disinfectant, damp fur, old blankets, and a kind of tired hope he had never found a name for. Somewhere toward the back, a small dog barked twice and then reconsidered. A cat smacked a paw against a carrier door with theatrical insult. Someone in another room dropped a metal bowl, and the sound clanged through the building like a struck nerve. Evan's jaw tightened. Not at the bowl. At the sound that followed. Nothing. No scrabbling, no sharp bark, no normal animal fuss. Just an absence. A quiet so sudden it seemed to pull the room narrower around it. Behind the front desk, a woman in her late 50s looked up from a stack of forms. She had silver-threaded hair pinned up without vanity, and a practical face lined by years of concern she had learned not to dramatize. "Afternoon," she said. Evan gave a brief nod. "Let me know if you need anything. We're short on miracles today." It was dry enough to be funny. He nearly smiled. Nearly. He moved through the room without hurry. There were crates along one wall, a bulletin board crowded with faded adoption flyers, shelves of donated supplies, and beyond them the open area where larger dogs were kept when the rescue wasn't too full. A shepherd mix barked once at him and then sat down like it had changed its mind. A beagle with one folded ear leaned against the bars hopefully. Two younger dogs paced with that restless, eager energy people like to mistake for joy. Then he saw her. She was under a wooden desk in the corner of the back room, tucked so far beneath it that for a moment she looked less like a dog than like a shadow. Malinois mix, maybe, lean frame, long face, dark sable coat with lighter tan at the chest and legs. Her ears were up, but not with confidence, with vigilance. Her body did not move when he stepped closer. Not because she was calm, because stillness was her armor. Amber eyes lifted to him. Not pleading, not warm, watching. The metal bowl that had crashed somewhere in the building had left its mark. Her muscles held a tension that seemed to go all the way into the floor. She had not lunged, she had not barked. She had simply folded in tighter around herself and waited for the danger to reveal its next shape. Evan stood there longer than he meant to. He knew that kind of waiting. The woman from the front desk came up beside him, not close enough to startle the dog. "That's Luna," she said quietly. The name settled in the room. "She doesn't come out much. She comes out when she thinks she has to." The woman crossed her arms lightly. "Name's Marlene, by the way." "Evan." She nodded as if she had expected that. In a town the size of Blackwater Cove, people usually knew each other's names long before they knew anything else. "What's her story?" Marlene let out a breath through her nose. "Depends how honest you want it." "Honest works." "She's smart," Marlene said. "Too smart for people who want easy. Learns routines fast, knows commands, reads people better than some people read each other, doesn't bite, doesn't destroy furniture, doesn't make trouble in any way folks can complain about without sounding guilty." She tilted her head toward the desk. "But she startles at sudden sounds, doors, raised voices, metal clatter, anything sharp or unpredictable. She was adopted twice, returned twice." Evan did not take his eyes off Luna. "For being difficult?" "For being inconvenient," Marlene said. "That's usually the word people mean." Luna's gaze shifted once, not away from him but past him, to the hallway. "Listening?" "Background?" he asked. Marlene's mouth flattened. "Incomplete. Animal control brought her in with another dog from a property 2 counties south. No obvious injuries by the time she got to us. But there were reports of domestic disturbances. Broken things. Screaming. Doors slammed hard enough for neighbors to hear. The usual sad music." Her voice thinned just slightly at the edges. "Sometimes you don't need a hand laid on you to learn the world is loud and dangerous." That sentence entered Evan like cold. He crouched slowly, enough to lower himself without putting pressure on the space beneath the desk. Luna did not retreat. That alone meant something. A lot of dogs would have. She stayed very still, eyes on him, body taut, calculating. He rested his forearms loosely on his knees. "You don't try very hard, do you?" he said, not softly exactly, but with no weight that would press against her. Luna blinked once. Marlene said, "Most dogs here still make the attempt. Tail wag, hopeful face, some version of 'please pick me.'" She stopped doing that. Why? Maybe it didn't work. The answer was simple. That made it worse. Evan looked at Luna again. He saw intelligence in her. Not the bright, eager intelligence of a dog waiting for a game, but the hard, disciplined kind that develops when survival depends on patterns. Her head tilted just enough to catch a sound from the front room. Her nostrils flared. She knew where everyone was. She knew how the air in this place moved. She probably knew which floorboard squeaked and which didn't. Not broken, he thought. Tired. Marlene watched him in silence for a long moment. You've had working dogs before? No. You look at her like you understand the manual. There's no manual. A flicker of humor touched Marlene's mouth. That might be the most useful thing anyone said in here all week. Evan kept his attention on Luna. The room around him seemed to narrow, edges blurring in that old familiar way when memory approached from somewhere he had not invited it. A hallway in another country. Concrete walls. The smell of dust and metal. Someone shouting over comms. Another voice too calm for what was happening. The slam of a door. The instant after, that stretch of impossible silence before impact or return fire or the next order. He blinked once and the rescue came back into focus. Marlene said nothing. Good. She looked like a woman who knew when to leave another person's ghosts where they stood. He straightened. She still available? Marlene seemed to weigh the question before answering. Yes. Then I'll take her. Her eyebrows went up, not dramatically, just enough to show surprise had reached her before professionalism could stop it. You sure? No. That earned a short, surprised breath that was almost a laugh. I appreciate the honesty, she said. Evan slid his hands into his jacket pockets. What I mean is, I'm not making promises I can't keep on the first sentence, but she won't sleep here tonight. Marlene studied him. All right. The paperwork took longer than it should have and felt less significant than it was. Name, address, emergency contact. He hesitated a fraction of a second at that line, then wrote Wade Carter. The town's unofficial carpenter, official gossip-resistant repairman, and the closest thing Evan had to someone who would answer the phone if called. Marlene noticed, but did not comment. She'll need time, she said as she unlocked Luna's crate space and stepped back. And probably a routine, and patience. Maybe more than you think you have. Evan looked at the dog under the desk. That's fine. Is it? He considered that. No, he said, but it'll do. Marlene crouched and clipped a leash gently onto Luna's collar. Luna flinched at the metallic sound but did not resist. When Marlene drew back, the dog stayed where she was. Evan waited. He did not call her. He did not coax. He did not kneel back down and make a production of kindness. He simply stood there, leash loose in his hand, leaving space for choice. After several long seconds, Luna slid forward in a low, careful motion. One paw. Another. Her body emerged inch by inch from under the desk, like someone walking out of a bunker after hearing the shelling stop but not yet trusting the silence. When she fully stood, Evan saw the rest of her. Scar tissue along one shoulder, old enough to have faded. Slight hollows at the flank. Strength still there beneath caution. A dog that had not given up so much as stopped volunteering. Come on, he said, not warm, not cold, just clear. Luna stepped once, then stopped, head angled toward the front of the building. Always checking exits, Evan thought. He understood that too. Together they moved toward the door. A terrier barked at them as they passed. Luna's muscles locked for one instant, then released. She did not pull. Outside, the wind hit them both at once. Sharp, salty, immediate. Luna's ears shifted back. Her nose lifted. For the first time, she looked fully out into the world instead of only at the nearest place to hide. Evan opened the passenger side truck door. Up. She did not obey, like a trained dog used to confident men and clear commands. She assessed the seat, the height, the sound of the wind, the position of his hand, the angle of escape. Then she climbed in with deliberate caution and stood facing forward, body rigid, head high. Marlene came to the doorway, arms folded against the cold. "Call if she stops eating," she said. "Or if she won't settle, or if you think you're in over your head." Evan glanced at her. "When?" he said. That almost smile again. "When?" He shut the door and walked around to the driver's side. By the time he slid behind the wheel, Luna had not moved from her braced position. She watched the street with all the concentration of a soldier reading a perimeter after dark. The heater coughed awake. The windshield shivered beneath the first touch of sleet. Evan started the truck. Neither of them looked at the other as they pulled away from the rescue, but the silence between them had changed. Not softened, not trusted, only changed. And sometimes that was how everything began. The road to Evan's house curved along the edge of town and then away from it, past a closed diner, a stretch of scrubgrass silvered by frost, and a line of black pines that leaned inland under years of relentless weather. On one side, the sea remained half visible through breaks in the trees. On the other, small houses sat back from the road, their porch lights beginning to glow in the early dark. Luna rode without lying down. She stood on the passenger seat, rigid but balanced, one paw adjusting now and then as the truck turned. Her eyes tracked every passing headlight, every swinging sign, every figure moving along the sidewalks. When a motorcycle coughed 2 blocks away, her body tightened hard enough that Evan could hear the faint shift of the seat springs. He did not speak right away. Then, because silence could become its own kind of pressure if left untouched too long, he said, "You can sit if you want." Luna did not. "That's fine too." The words were more for the shape of the room than for compliance. A sound placed lightly, nothing more. By the time they reached the house, evening had settled fully. Evan's place stood on a rise above the rocky shoreline, weathered cedar dark against the wind, its porch light casting a small gold circle onto the boards. The house was solid and plain, built to last rather than charm. A narrow path led to the steps. To the right sat a woodshed and a split rail fence silvered by salt. Behind it, the sea breathed in the dark. Evan cut the engine. The sudden quiet carried its own weight. Luna stayed exactly where she was. He stepped out, the cold biting at his face, and came around to open her door. All right. She looked at the ground first, then at the porch, then at him. When she jumped down, she landed softly but stayed low, every line of her body angled for retreat. He walked toward the house. Luna followed several paces behind and slightly to the side. Offset, he thought. Not at heel, not trailing. Tactical distance. The thought came so naturally it irritated him a little. Inside, the house met them with warmth that had not yet reached the corners. A fire burned low in the stove. The room smelled of seasoned wood, coffee grounds, cold air caught in jackets, and the faint mineral scent of the sea that always found a way in. Lamplight softened the rough grain of the floorboards and the old wool throw over the couch. Everything was in its place. Too much in its place, perhaps. Luna stopped at the threshold. The old hinges on the door gave a short complaint as Evan shut it behind them. That tiny sound was enough. Luna flinched hard and pressed herself backward toward the wall beside the entrance, breath suddenly shallow. Evan stood still. The first rule, he thought, don't crowd the fear. He took off his gloves slowly and laid them on the side table instead of dropping them. He shrugged out of his jacket with the same care. The radio on the kitchen shelf clicked on automatically with the timer he had forgotten to change. Some evening news host speaking too brightly about a storm front off the coast. Luna recoiled at the voice. Evan crossed the room in 2 strides and shut it off. The silence after felt better. He filled a metal bowl at the sink, then paused. The bowl in his hand caught a little too much light, a little too much memory. He set it down gently, found an old ceramic mixing bowl in the cabinet, and used that instead. Water first, food next, measured into a wide dish and placed halfway between Luna and the kitchen. Not so close that it became pressure, not so far that it suggested distance. Luna did not move. "That's yours," he said. Nothing. He leaned against the counter, arms loosely folded. The stove ticked as it warmed. A log shifted in the fire. Wind moved across the outside wall with a long, low hum. Several minutes passed. Luna's eyes scanned the room in patterns. Door, window, fire, hallway, back to door. She was mapping it, measuring the lines of threat, the angles of escape, the sources of unpredictability. Her ears twitched at every change in sound, even the whisper of water settling in old pipes. Evan waited. He had not always been good at waiting. He had once built his whole adult life around decisive movement, fast judgments, the kind of action that made hesitation look like weakness. But years had taught him something discipline never had. Sometimes waiting was not indecision. Sometimes it was respect. Eventually, he turned away first. He moved to the stove and put the kettle on. The whistle came to mind too late. When it began 10 minutes later, sharp, high, slicing clean through the room, Luna launched backward so violently that a chair scraped and toppled. She vanished into the narrow space behind the couch before Evan had even crossed half the room. He snatched the kettle off the burner. Steam rushed up around his hand. "Damn it!" The word came out flat, not angry. At himself. Behind the couch, he could hear Luna breathing. Fast, controlled only by effort. He stood there holding the kettle, feeling foolish in a way that went deeper than the mistake itself. Of course, he had not thought about the whistle. Why would he? It was a harmless household sound, the sort of thing his mind had learned to ignore years ago. Harmless to him. He poured the water out and set the kettle in the sink. Then he righted the chair without letting the legs slap the floor. "Okay," he said into the room. "That one's on me." Luna did not answer, which was reasonable enough. The rest of the evening became a catalog of small failures and adjustments. The spoon against the mug, too sharp. The back door letting the wind shove it a little too hard when he checked the latch. Too sudden. A stack of mail he dropped onto the table from 6 inches up. Too much. By midnight, Evan had learned more about Luna than he had in the rescue. He learned that she startled hardest at metal and sudden voices, that low, steady noises bothered her less than intermittent ones, that she did not pace when frightened, she compressed, that she preferred corners with wide visual access, that she would not drink if he stood too close, that she watched him even when appearing not to. He also learned several things about his house. The kitchen chair dragged on the third plank from the stove and made a scraping sound he had never noticed. The front door caught on the latch and snapped the last inch closed. The old pipes pinged once when the heat shifted. The chain on the porch light ticked in the wind outside. The keys he always dropped into the blue enamel bowl by the door sounded like thrown nails. He had been living inside noise and calling it normal. Near 1 in the morning, when he finally sat down in the armchair by the fire, Luna had moved from behind the couch to the far corner near the hallway. It was a better position strategically. She could see him, the front door, and most of the room. She could not see the back window, but the reflection in the glass gave her enough. He rubbed a hand over his face. His coffee had gone cold on the side table. "You've got opinions," he muttered. Luna blinked once, eyes still open and watchful in the dim. Fair enough. He did not remember falling asleep, only waking later with a sharp ache in his neck and the fire reduced to red bones of light. For one disoriented second he stayed perfectly still, old instinct lifting through him before thought. Then he listened. The house breathed around him. Wind outside, the slow tick of cooling cast iron. Somewhere farther off, the sea. And another sound, small, steady, not close but not all the way across the room either. Breathing. He opened his eyes. Luna was no longer in the far corner. She had moved during the night to a place midway between the hallway and his chair. Not beside him, not near enough to touch, but nearer than before, curled with her body still angled toward the front door. Evan looked at her for a long moment. "Well," he said quietly, "that's something." Morning came gray and hard. The next mistake happened before sunrise, when he stepped into his boots and the heel struck the floor too sharply. Luna was awake instantly, head snapping up, body tensed. Evan stopped with one boot half on, then slowly sat back down on the bench. "Right," he said. "We're not doing that either." By late morning, he had made a list on the back of an old utility bill. Front door bumper, felt under key bowl, new kettle radio off timer chair, leg pads check porch chain. He stared at the list for a while. Then he picked up the phone. Wade answered on the fourth ring. "If this is about your gutters, I already told you I'm not climbing that side of the roof in sleet." "It's not the gutters." A pause. "Evan?" "Yes." "Huh. I figured telemarketer or hallucination. What do you need?" "Door bumpers, felt pads, maybe weather stripping, and you got a kettle that doesn't scream like it's dying?" There was silence on the line long enough that Evan considered hanging up. Then Wade said, "Did you finally decide to join civilization by making tea?" "I got a dog." Another pause. Then a bark of laughter loud enough that Evan held the phone a little farther from his ear. "You got a what?" "A dog." "Voluntarily?" "Yes, Wade." "Did you hit your head? Can you bring the supplies or not?" Wade was still laughing when he said, "I'm coming over just to make sure this isn't some advanced cry for help." He arrived 40 minutes later in a truck held together by habit and profanity. Wade Carter was 63, broad through the chest, all ropey forearms and sawdust-colored beard. He wore a thick flannel coat and boots that sounded like personal opinions when they hit a porch. He came through the door mid-sentence, stopped dead, and stared. Luna had disappeared behind the hallway corner the moment the truck tires crunched in the drive. Wade looked at the empty room, then at Evan. "You were telling the truth. That's unsettling." "I do that sometimes." "Not socially." Wade set down a paper bag. "Where is she?" "Hiding." Wade lowered his voice automatically. "Bad with strangers?" "Bad with sudden loud, metal, doors, radios, kettles, keys, and apparently me having feet." Wade gave him a long look. "So the dog has taste." Evan pointed at the front door. "That snap on the latch, need to soften it." Wade walked over, opened it, closed it once. Winced. "Good Lord, you've been living in a trap?" "Apparently." For the next hour they worked their way through the house in an odd, practical silence, interrupted by short exchanges. Wade installed a rubber bumper on the doorframe, pads under chairs, soft felt in the enamel bowl by the entry table. He tightened the porch chain, adjusted the back hinge, and produced a small electric kettle from his truck that heated quietly without the shriek of the old one. At one point, he found Evan standing in the middle of the kitchen, dropping a spoon from different heights into the sink to test sound levels. Wade watched for a full 3 seconds before saying, "You realize if anyone sees this, they'll assume the dog's in charge." Evan, to his own surprise, smiled. "Might be." Wade grunted with satisfaction. "There he is." "What?" "That expression. You almost look alive." The smile disappeared, though not completely. "Don't make a thing of it." "Wouldn't dream of it." When Wade left, Luna still had not approached, but she had edged close enough to watch from the hallway opening. Her eyes never left him while he worked. She had not barked once. That evening, when Evan set down the new kettle and it began to warm in near silence, he saw Luna's ears flick and then settle. Later, he dropped his keys into the padded bowl, a dull hush instead of a sharp clatter. Luna looked toward the sound, but she did not flinch. Evan stood by the counter for a moment, staring at a felt-lined key bowl as if it had revealed some larger truth. Maybe it had. He looked over at Luna in her chosen corner. "I'm learning," he said. She did not wag, she did not come closer, but after he sat down by the fire, she drank from the water bowl while he was still in the room. And when night lowered itself around the house again, she did not choose the spot nearest the door. She chose the one with the best view of him. By the end of the first week, Evan had learned the shape of Luna's fear the way some men learn tides. Not perfectly, never that, but enough to read its patterns. There were good mornings when she came out from her sleeping corner before he had set the coffee on. There were bad afternoons when a truck backfired on the road below and sent her under the kitchen table for 20 minutes. She never stopped being watchful. She merely shifted the distance from which she watched. He took her outside early, before the town had fully woken, when the roads were still damp with salt fog and only the gulls and the fishermen belonged to the hour. At first, Luna would only go as far as the edge of the porch, body low, nostrils working hard as the wind delivered the entire world to her in fragments. Seaweed, wet rope, fish scales, old wood, diesel, frost, the faint trace of fox somewhere inland. A man 2 houses down who always smoked clove cigarettes on Wednesdays. The garbage truck route 3 streets over. She learned the property boundaries by scent before she trusted them by sight. The first time Evan led her down the path toward town, she walked with that same offset distance she had used at the rescue and from the truck to the house. Close enough to remain in the pattern, far enough to preserve escape. Her paws were silent on the hard ground. Her head moved constantly. The town met them in layers. A flag rope tapping a pole near the bait shop. The slap of halyards against masts in the harbor. The thin cry of gulls circling above the fish market. The hiss of tires on wet pavement. Somewhere behind all of it, the ceaseless low percussion of the ocean against rock. Luna startled at some things and ignored others. A gull shrieking overhead barely earned a flick of an ear. A bicycle bell 2 blocks away tightened every muscle in her body. The swish of a woman's coat meant nothing. A metal sign banging loose in the wind made her stop dead and stare, as if the sound itself might grow teeth. She noticed people before Evan did, noticed them in ways he could not. Once, nearing the post office, she slowed and angled slightly away from a man approaching from the far sidewalk. Evan looked up, puzzled. The man was still a good distance off, walking normally. Then the wind shifted and Evan caught it, the sour reek of morning liquor. Luna had identified it a full 10 seconds earlier. Another day she stopped before the crosswalk even though the road looked empty. A delivery van rolled fast around the blind turn half a breath later. "You're not wrong very often," Evan said quietly. Luna kept her gaze on the road until the van had passed. Blackwater Cove watched them. Not rudely. Small towns had a way of pretending not to watch while cataloging every detail anyway. People noticed Evan walking daily with a dog that looked like a military-grade ghost. They noticed he shortened his stride when she stiffened. They noticed he crossed streets to avoid the noisiest corners. They noticed the strange tenderness of a man built like old oak slowing his entire life for an animal that did not even walk at his knee. Comments began as they always did in towns like this, sideways casual, offered with hands deep in coat pockets. "That yours now?" from the woman at the bakery, who meant both the dog and the change in his routine. "She looks smart," from the harbor master, which in town language also meant complicated. "Pretty thing," from a teenage cashier at the grocery store, who reached a hand out too quickly and received from Luna a full-body recoil so immediate the girl withdrew in shame. "It's all right," Evan told the girl. "She's not mad at you." Luna stood pressed against his leg, trembling not with aggression but with effort. He lowered his hand without touching her. "Too fast," he said, for both of them. "That's all." The girl nodded, cheeks red. "Sorry." Evan gave a small shake of his head. "No need." That mattered. Luna felt the change in his tone, or perhaps the absence of tension in it. She settled a fraction sooner than she might have. On the 8th day, they met Nora Bell properly. Evan already knew her by sight. Everyone did. Nora was 78, maybe 80, with a narrow frame and a careful way of moving that made each step look negotiated rather than assumed. She lived alone in the blue-gray cottage next door, the one with the driftwood wreath on the door and the brass wind chime hanging from the porch beam. Her husband had died years earlier. Since then, she had become one of those quiet fixtures towns keep without admitting they are afraid of losing them. She saw Evan and Luna from her front walk while clipping dead stems from a flower box gone winter bare. "Well now," she said in a voice so soft it barely disturbed the air, "you've acquired company." Evan paused at the edge of his own path. Luna stopped too, immediately alert but not panicked. That was new enough to notice. "Seems that way?" Nora set the shears aside. She did not approach. She did not crouch, coo, or offer her hand. She looked at Luna the way she might have looked at a nervous bird perched close enough to study but too fragile for assumptions. "She's beautiful," Nora said. Luna watched her without moving. "She startles easy," Evan said. Nora nodded once. "Then I'll stay right here." There was no offense in it, no hurt pride, just accommodation so natural it landed almost like grace. After a moment, she added, "I'm Nora Bell, in case you've been living beside me 7 years and somehow missed the name. That would be rude. Not impossible." A dry thread of humor. Evan almost smiled. "This is Luna." Nora glanced at the dog again, then passed her to the sea. "Good strong name. Moon names usually go to things people don't understand at first." Evan didn't ask what that meant. With Nora, it seemed better to let certain sentences arrive and sit where they landed. Over the next few days, she became part of the edges of their routine. She would be out sweeping her porch or adjusting potted herbs, or simply standing in a heavy cardigan with a mug between both hands, looking toward the water as if she and the horizon had an arrangement. She always spoke to Evan before she spoke to Luna, and when she spoke to Luna, she kept her tone low and her body still. "Morning, miss. Wind's cross today, isn't it?" "That gull's louder than necessary." Luna never wagged, but she also did not retreat as sharply around Nora as she did around others. Her ears remained up. Her eyes stayed on the woman's hands. Yet the explosive edge of fear was absent. She likes you, Nora said one afternoon, after Luna had remained standing in the yard instead of dragging Evan toward the porch. No, Evan said. She tolerates you. Nora smiled at that. At my age, that's plenty. It was not just Nora. Rachel Keene, the local veterinarian, met them when Evan finally brought Luna in for a checkup. Rachel was in her 40s, practical, direct, and built from the kind of calm that did not advertise itself. She knelt sideways rather than head-on. She did not make eye contact too early. She let Luna sniff her sleeve and then the floor, and then the cabinet leg before attempting anything else. Good, Rachel murmured. No rush. The exam was a choreography of patience. Luna trembled when the stethoscope touched her ribs. She jerked at the clink of a drawer handle. But she did not snap. She did not shut down entirely either. She endured with a level of self-control that told Rachel more than any chart could. She's not aggressive, Rachel said later, while Luna drank water from a paper bowl in the corner of the exam room. She's hypervigilant. Evan leaned against the wall. Difference? Huge difference. Rachel clicked her pen closed. Aggression is an answer. Vigilance is a question that never stops asking itself. Is it safe? Is it safe now? What about now? She glanced at Luna. Dogs like her are exhausting to people because they're exhausted themselves. Evan looked down. Rachel went on, gentler now. You're already doing the right things. Predictable routine, space, no forcing affection, lowering sudden stimuli. He frowned. How do you know that? She gave him a look. Because she's here, and because she came in with you instead of fighting every inch from the parking lot. That was true. Luna had hesitated at the clinic door, then entered because Evan had entered. Not confidently, but willingly enough. She'll probably always startle, Rachel said. That may not change much. Healing doesn't always look like becoming unafraid. Sometimes it's just recovering faster, or choosing to stay in the room. Choosing to stay in the room. The phrase lingered. On the way home, wind rolled in hard from the water, carrying rain that had not yet decided whether to fall. Luna rode seated for the first time instead of standing the whole way. Her posture was still alert, but not braced against every turn. That evening, Evan found a tin on his porch. Inside were 6 small lemon cookies and a folded note in neat, careful handwriting. For the brave dog and the man learning to walk softly. Nora. He stood there longer than necessary, the tin in his hands and the sea stretching dark beyond the yard. Inside, Luna waited just past the doorway, eyes lifting to him. He held up the tin. You're getting fan mail. She tilted her head once. He set the tin on the counter and after a hesitation that surprised him, walked next door. Nora answered after the second knock. She had changed into a wool shawl and house slippers, and the warm smell of tea and cinnamon drifted past her from inside. You could have just waved from your porch, she said. I know. She regarded him with mild amusement. And yet, here you are. Evan lifted the tin slightly. Thank you. You're welcome. He looked over her shoulder. The house behind her was small but softly lit. Framed photographs on the wall. A blanket folded over the couch arm. A brass wind chime visible through the front window, hanging on the porch where the sea breeze could catch it. You baked? He asked. Nora made a face. Bought them. I'm old, not magical. That got an actual laugh out of him. Brief, low, but real. Nora's expression changed, not with sentiment, just with quiet notice. She had the face of someone who recognized fragile things without naming them too quickly. Well, she said, tell Luna she has excellent ears and tragic luck. I think she knows both. Before he could turn to go, Nora asked, Does she sleep better yet? The question was so precise, it stopped him. Some nights? That's how it starts. With dogs. With anyone. He looked at her a moment, then nodded once and walked back through the dark with the cookie tin cooling in his hands. When he entered the house, Luna came 2 steps toward him before remembering herself and stopping. 2 steps, not many, enough. He set the tin down and crouched slowly. Nora says you have excellent ears, he told her. I'm beginning to suspect she's right. Luna blinked. Later that night, when the house had gone still and the fire had settled into a deep orange glow, Evan looked up from his book to find Luna not in her usual corner, not under the table, but stretched on the rug 3 feet from his chair. Not touching, not even close, but near enough that if he had dropped his hand from the armrest, it would have reached the air above her back. He did not move. Some things broke if noticed too soon. So he turned 1 page very carefully and let the house hold the moment without naming it. Outside, Nora's wind chime stirred once in the dark, soft, almost musical. Luna's ears flicked, then settled again. The day Nora fell began with weather that felt undecided. Clouds moved low over Blackwater Cove in torn gray sheets. The sea had lost its horizon by noon, folding sky and water into one long bruise-colored distance. Wind came in restless shifts, hard for 20 minutes, then strangely still, then back again from another angle as though even the weather had trouble keeping its mind made up. Luna had been uneasy since morning. Not frightened in the usual ways. Uneasy. It showed in the details. She ate breakfast more slowly. She paused at the kitchen window twice within an hour. She lifted her head whenever the wind changed direction, nostrils working, ears moving independently, like instruments tuning to something Evan could not hear. By afternoon, he was repairing one of the porch boards that always loosened after heavy rain. The hammering had to be done, but he kept it measured, 3 taps at a time, pausing between each so Luna would not absorb it as an onslaught. She lay just inside the door where she could see him, body taut but staying in place. Then the wind rose. It came up from the sea in one long hard shove that rattled the side of the house, hissed through the dry dune grass, and struck Nora's brass wind chime next door. The sound was bright, metallic, irregular. Normally, that would have been enough to drive Luna back into the hallway. Evan had learned to expect that. Metal in moving air was one of her worst triggers. He straightened from the porch board and looked through the open doorway, already anticipating the retreat. It did not come. Luna stood instead. Her body went rigid, but rather than pulling away from the sound, she moved toward the front of the house. 1 quick step, another. Then she stopped by the door, head lifted, ears forward, trembling so hard the line of her back shook. That's enough, Evan said automatically, setting the hammer down. Come on. Luna did not move. The wind chime rang again, sharper now. Behind it, so faint at first he thought it was imagination, came another sound. Not part of the weather. A metallic tap, then drag, then nothing. The wind shifted and swallowed it. Luna whined low in her throat. Evan had heard that sound from her only a handful of times and never like this. Not panic exactly, urgency, distress with direction. She's just setting herself off, he muttered, half to reassure himself. But the words didn't sit right. Luna paced once before the door, not wide, restless pacing, tight, purposeful. She glanced toward the porch, then back at him, then toward the porch again. The chime rang. Wind, then that other thing again. Tap. A scrape, as if something small metal had been pushed across wood or linoleum. Then silence. The hair along Evan's arms rose beneath his sleeves. He crossed the room in 4 strides and opened the door. Wind shoved cold into the house hard enough to make the entry rug jump. Luna flinched, but stayed. From the porch, he could see Nora's front walk, slick with blown leaves and spray. Her curtains were half drawn. No lights on in the front room, though it was earlier than she usually let the place go dark. The brass chime swung wildly from its hook, catching gusts and then falling still in brief, shivering pauses. In one of those pauses came the sound again. Metal against something hard, faint, irregular, human in its wrongness. Luna made a sharp, suppressed sound and pressed forward 1 step into the doorway, then stopped as though the air itself might strike her. Evan looked at her. She was terrified, and still she was trying to point. "All right," he said. He grabbed his jacket from the peg by the door and crossed the yard at a fast walk that turned into a run without his permission. Behind him, he heard Luna's pause on the porch boards, then on the path, then hesitate. She followed anyway. Nora's front door was not fully closed. It sat crooked on the latch, moving a fraction with each hard gust. Evan knocked once out of habit and then pushed it open. "Nora?" No answer. Inside, the house smelled of cold tea, old books, and the bitter metallic edge of fear. "Nora!" He found her in the kitchen, half crumpled between the table and the counter. One slipper had come off. A metal cane lay on the floor just out of her reach, its handle resting against a chair leg. Tap, scrape, tap, each time the wind through the loose back door draft nudged it. That was the sound. Nora's face had gone pale with pain and effort. She was conscious, but only just enough to turn her head when he dropped to one knee beside her. "Evan," she whispered, the word dry and thin. "Don't move." Wasn't planning to. Even then, the old woman found room for a thread of humor. He scanned quickly. No obvious head wound. Awkward angle at the hip maybe, or ribs. Hard to tell. The floor beneath her was cold. Her hand shook when she tried to press it against the cupboard. "How long?" "Since," she swallowed. "Morning, I think," reached for the kettle. Floor went away. He pulled his phone free and called 911 while stripping off his jacket with the other hand. He folded it and eased it under her shoulders for insulation, speaking to the dispatcher in a voice that turned calm the way some machines turn on. Female, late 70s. Fall. Conscious. Breathing. Possible hip fracture. Alone for several hours. Send EMS to 14 Seagrass Lane. Yes, front door open. Yes, I'm staying with her. When he hung up, he crouched lower. You cold? Only in every part of me. Good, means you're still funny. Unfortunately, that got a breath that could have become a laugh if the moment had been different. He covered her with the quilt from the nearby chair and checked her pulse. Fast, but there. Skin cool, no smell of gas, no signs of stroke that he could see. She was lucid enough to answer him, which helped. From the front hall came the delicate broken ringing of the wind chime outside, and then the soft pad of paws. Luna appeared in the kitchen doorway. She stayed there, body taut, ears flicking at every metallic whisper from the swinging chime, and the cane still shifting on the floor. She was shaking visibly now, but she did not leave. Nora turned her head with effort and saw her. "There you are," she murmured. Luna did not move closer. Evan slid the cane farther from the draft with one foot so it would stop striking the chair. The room quieted a little. Luna's breathing eased, though only slightly. "Nora, listen to me," he said. "Sheriff Tom and the ambulance are on the way. You're going to stay awake." "I'm awake." "Talk to me anyway." "Bossy thing. Talk." So she did. Not in a dramatic way. She answered small questions. What day is it? Had she hit her head? Where does it hurt? Can you feel your fingers? Toes? Did you eat today? With every answer, her voice grew a little steadier, drawn perhaps by the simple fact of another person in the room who was not panicking. That mattered. Panic was a sound all its own. When Sheriff Tom arrived 2 minutes before the ambulance, he filled the doorway with cold air and careful authority. Broad-shouldered in his 50s, face weather-cut and unreadable in the useful ways, he took in the scene quickly and nodded once to Evan. What have we got? Fall, possibly hip, been down several hours, alert and oriented. Tom knelt by Nora's other side. Afternoon, Miss Bell. Took you long enough? Traffic. There are 12 people in this town. 13 if you count the fishermen with the illegal crab pots. Tom's tone was dry enough to hold her steady. The paramedics arrived moments later and moved with practiced efficiency, all measured hands and calm voices. Evan stepped back to give them room. Luna remained in the hall. One medic glanced toward her. Dog okay? She won't come forward, Evan said, but she won't leave either. Tom looked over his shoulder and noticed Luna fully for the first time. That the rescue dog Wade's been talking half the county about? Evan almost groaned. Probably. Tom watched Luna a second. Her whole body shivered each time the wind chime outside stirred, yet she kept her position, eyes locked not on the strangers but on Nora being lifted. That so, he murmured. When they had Nora strapped and ready to move, she reached one hand weakly toward Evan. He stepped close so she wouldn't have to lift far. You came fast, she said. He glanced at Luna in the doorway. Wasn't my idea. Nora followed his gaze. A tired, understanding softness crossed her face. That girl heard me, she whispered. Evan did not answer. He couldn't, not honestly, not in a way that would fit inside ordinary language. Outside, as the stretcher was loaded into the ambulance, wind drove spray across the road in silver bursts. The brass chime rang again, and Luna flinched hard enough to step sideways, but still she remained near the porch. Tom came back from speaking with the paramedics and stopped beside Evan. Neighbor saw you run over? He asked. No, dog alerted me. Tom's eyes shifted toward Luna, then back. Dog did, huh? Evan shrugged, because there was no cleaner way to say it. Tom zipped his coat higher against the wind. Well, good thing she did. The ambulance pulled away, red lights turning wet pavement into strips of moving color. Tom lingered long enough to make sure the house was locked, the stove was off, and Nora's daughter, who lived 3 hours inland, had been called. Then he touched the brim of his cap and headed back to his cruiser. Evan stood for a moment in the raw weather, hands in his pockets, watching the road go empty again. Luna was beside the porch steps now, still trembling, still angled for retreat, but beside him. He looked down. You stayed, he said. She lifted her face toward him, ears tight back, not trust, not comfort, choice. He crouched and let his hand rest against his own knee, not reaching. After a long hesitation, Luna stepped close enough that her shoulder nearly brushed his leg before she caught herself and stopped. That was close enough. Together they crossed back through the yard while Nora's wind chime rang on behind them, the sound no longer meaningless, no longer just another trigger in the air. Now it was the shape of a life almost lost, and of one that had not been, because a dog too sensitive for most homes had heard, inside the familiar panic of metal and wind, one small rhythm that did not belong. News moved through Blackwater Cove the way weather did. Fast along the edges, then slower through the middle, collecting detail as it went. By the next morning, 3 different versions of the story were already circulating. In one, Evan had somehow heard Nora fall through the storm. In another, he had gone over because he had a bad feeling, which was exactly the kind of nonsense people like to invent when reality was more specific and stranger. In the third, which Wade repeated with relish at the hardware store, the spooky dog next door basically deputized herself and saved Miss Nora's life while Evan followed orders for once. Evan heard that version from Wade directly around noon. Wade arrived under the pretense of returning a screwdriver he had not needed to borrow. He stood in the doorway, looked over Evan's shoulder at Luna lying near the stove and said, "So, I hear the Queen has begun emergency operations." Evan took the screwdriver. "Good afternoon to you too." Wade stepped inside without waiting to be invited, as was his lifelong method with every threshold in town. "Tom says the old girl will be all right. Bruised hip, minor fracture, dehydrated, cold. Another few hours and it might have gone worse." Evan nodded once. Wade's expression shifted slightly, humor thinning. "You did good." Luna heard her, still did good. Evan looked over at the dog. She was awake but resting, head on paws, eyes following every shift in the room. Since yesterday, something in her had gone taut in a new way. Not more afraid exactly, but more internally stirred. She had spent the morning alternating between sleep and sudden alert listening, as if replaying the event with the same relentless nervous system that had detected it. Wade noticed his attention drift. She eating? Yes. Sleeping? Some. Any different? Evan took a second to answer. She's staying closer. Wade grunted. Maybe she's decided you're trainable. That might have been the end of it, but later, after Wade had gone and the house was quiet again, the question remained. Why had Luna heard it? Not in the magical way people wanted to tell it. Not instinct, not fate. Something real, something learned. Something honed sharp enough by previous hurt that she had identified danger where others would have dismissed noise. That evening, Evan drove back to the rescue. Marlene was in the laundry room folding towels. She looked up as he entered and took in his face before saying, "Dog sick?" "No." "She run off?" "No. That's two good surprises already." He leaned against the doorway. "I need to know more about her." Marlene's hand slowed on the towel. "Something happen?" "She alerted me to my neighbor being injured." "Alerted how?" Evan explained. The chime, the wrong sound beneath it, the pacing, the refusal to retreat. Marlene listened without interruption, then folded the towel one more time and set it aside. "That tracks," she said quietly. "With what?" "With the way she came in." Marlene crossed her arms. Luna always noticed things before the other dogs did. The delivery truck half a mile away. The volunteer who was about to have a seizure before anyone saw him go pale. Two cats fighting behind the shed before the noise even started. She'd pick up on pressure changes, routines breaking, irregular sounds. But around sharp noise, she'd also come apart. Evan watched her face. What happened where she came from? Marlene shook her head. "We never got the full story. Animal control filed it as welfare neglect associated with repeated domestic disturbance calls. There were 2 dogs on the property, lots of broken items, signs of people yelling more than talking. Neighbors said things got thrown. Doors slammed, metal pans, furniture dragged, that kind of house." She looked down briefly. The other dog was older. He didn't make it long after intake. Heart issues, stress, malnutrition, age. Luna was the one who kept watching everything. Evan let that sit. Was anyone hitting her? No proof. Marlene's voice went flat in that professional way people learn when emotion would only make the facts blur. But here's the thing, Evan. A body doesn't always need direct violence to learn fear. Sometimes all it needs is to live long enough in a place where every loud sound means someone's temper has shifted. He thought of Luna under the desk, of her watching exits, of the way she startled not with confusion but with anticipation, as if noise was not noise but warning. She heard the pattern, he said more to himself than to Marlene. She probably lived by patterns. On the drive home, rain slapped hard against the windshield and then softened. Evan kept both hands on the wheel and let the past come, because sometimes refusing it only sharpened its edges. He thought of nights overseas, where the difference between a harmless sound and the first wrong one meant whether a team slept or bled. He thought of returning home afterward and feeling something close to contempt for people who could still tell themselves a slammed door was just a slammed door. He thought of the woman he had once almost built a life with, standing in a kitchen not unlike his, saying, "I don't know how to live with someone who's always waiting for impact." At the time, he had heard accusation. Years later, he heard exhaustion. When he got back, Luna met him at the door, not dramatically. She had simply come to the entryway before he had fully turned the knob. That alone would have been impossible a week ago. She sniffed the wet hem of his coat, then moved back enough to let him enter without crowding his legs. "Went to ask about you," he said, while hanging up the jacket carefully. "You've got a file. Congratulations." Her ears shifted. He changed into dry clothes and sat on the floor rather than in the chair, keeping a respectful distance. The stove hummed low. Rain stitched at the windows. Luna remained across from him at first, body folded but not hidden. Her head was up. The room held the kind of quiet that was not empty, just shared. "She says you learned a bad house," he told her. His voice sounded strange in the room, too direct perhaps, as if he had not spoken this much aloud in years. "Rachel says vigilance isn't aggression. It's a question that never stops asking itself." Luna blinked once. He looked down at his own hands, calloused and veined, and suddenly older than they had the day before. "I know something about that." The words opened more easily than he expected once they were there. "I used to think if you stayed prepared enough, listened hard enough, read every angle early enough, you could outrun the worst parts. Maybe survive them cleaner." He gave a humorless half-smile. "Turns out you just bring them home quieter." Luna shifted. Not away. Closer by perhaps half a foot. He noticed and looked past her rather than at her. Instinct telling him direct acknowledgement might break the fragile line being offered. "You don't need to stop hearing things," he said after a while. "You don't need to turn into some easy dog for people who like simple stories. We'll just make this place less loud." There it was. Not a vow, not a dramatic rescue speech. Just an agreement made at floor level in a storm-ridden house. For a long minute, nothing changed. Then Luna rose, came forward in slow, deliberate steps, and lowered herself again, close enough that the front of her muzzle rested against the cuff of his jeans. The contact was so light he almost wondered if he had imagined it. He did not move. He did not reach down. He only sat there with his hands resting open over his knees, while the dog who had spent her first days in his house tracking escape routes laid the edge of her face against him and remained. Something inside his chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear and too much to do with it. "All right," he whispered. Rain continued against the glass. The stove breathed. Somewhere in the distance, a buoy bell sounded over the water. Luna startled at the bell, not much, only a flick through the spine, then settled again without lifting her head. Recovering faster, Rachel had said, or choosing to stay in the room. That night, when Evan rose to go to bed, Luna did not retreat to the hallway corner. She followed him as far as the bedroom door, then stopped there watching. "You can, if you want," he said. She did not cross the threshold. He nodded once. "That's fine, too." He left the door partly open. Around 2 in the morning, he woke from one of those dreams that never fully become images, only pressure and noise, and the certainty that something important has already gone wrong. He sat up sharply, pulse hard, breath caught somewhere between then and now. Before he could orient himself, he heard it. Luna's breathing from the doorway, slow, present, real. He looked over. She was lying just outside the room, not asleep, head up in the dim hall light, watching him. Not because she expected danger from him, because she had heard the shift. That knowledge landed somewhere deep and almost unbearable in its gentleness. No speeches, no miracle. Just a frightened creature staying close enough to witness another frightened creature wake. Evan sat back against the headboard and pressed a hand once over his face. "Well," he murmured into the dark, "that seems unfair." Luna's ears twitched. He let out a breath that might have become laughter under kinder circumstances. Then he lay back down. And because he was too tired to disguise the truth even from himself, he slept easier knowing she was there. Nora came home 9 days later with a cane, a grim dislike of hospital pudding, and firm opinions about being fussed over. Sheriff Tom drove her back himself because her daughter had been delayed by weather inland, and because in towns like Blackwater Cove, official duties often blurred into neighborly ones without anyone discussing it. Evan saw the cruiser pull in and went over before the engine had fully died. Nora was halfway out of the passenger seat already, jaw set. "You should let us help," Tom said. "I am letting you help. You're witnessing me do it myself." "She's been impossible since Tuesday," Tom told Evan. "I've been alive since 1947, Nora corrected. "That's not the same thing." Evan took her bag without arguing. Tom took the other arm, and between the two of them they got her up the walk and into the house. Luna waited at the property line, quivering with interest but not advancing. The cane click against the porch boards made her ears flatten. Still, she stayed. Inside, Nora lowered herself into her armchair with the dignity of a queen refusing to acknowledge pain. "You look terrible," she told Evan. "You're welcome back, too." Tom snorted. Nora smiled faintly and then saw Luna in the open doorway beyond the hall. "Well now," she said. "Heroine in attendance." Luna stood very still. Nora did not beckon. She simply inclined her head the smallest fraction, like a formal greeting offered across a room. "Thank you," she said. Something in Luna's posture changed. Not relaxation, not pride, but a brief loosening as if the air itself had stopped bracing against her. Over the following week, the town arranged itself around Nora in small practical ways. Tom stopped by mornings under the excuse of paperwork. Rachel checked her blood pressure twice. The woman from the bakery sent soup. Wade repaired the loose front step in the bathroom grab bar while complaining theatrically about the size of the screws in Nora's walls. Evan found himself there more often than any version of his old life would have predicted. At first, it was simple necessity. Nora needed firewood carried in. The porch light had burned out. Her kettle whistle was too sharp and made Luna skitter if the dog happened to be in the yard, so Evan replaced it with a quieter one and didn't tell her until after. Then there was the brass wind chime on the porch, the same one her late husband had made from polished old fishing tackle and fragments of marine brass. It had always been lovely to everyone except Luna. Evan stood looking at it one afternoon with Wade beside him on a ladder. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Wade asked. "That it's loud. That and that Miss Nora's gonna swat us both if we touch it without asking. She nearly died on this porch." Wade drove a screw slowly into the beam to secure a new hook farther from the door. Ain't the same argument. Nora, seated inside with a blanket over her knees and a cup of tea beside her, watched through the open screen and called, "If you men are vandalizing my husband's handiwork, kindly have the decency to do it symmetrically." Wade grinned. See? Gave permission. They did not take the chime down. They moved it to the far corner of the porch where the wind reached it less directly, softening the sound, not removing it, only changing its relationship to the house. That mattered to Evan more than he expected. You could not empty life of every noise sharp enough to hurt. You could only make room around it, adjust the angle, pad the impact, change what you could. Luna came with him when he visited Nora now, though never right away. She would stop at the porch, assess every sound, and only then cross the threshold if the room was quiet enough and the movements inside stayed predictable. Nora understood the rules instinctively. "No sudden admiration," she told Tom once as he started to lean down toward Luna. "The girl values discretion." Tom straightened obediently. "Yes, ma'am." "She likes you," Nora told the dog in her low voice. "That's the most dangerous part." Luna settled a little farther inside the room and lay down where she could see the front door, the kitchen, and Evan's chair. That became its own pattern. Nora's house, tea steaming, the slow creak of old floorboards. Tom dropping by with weather updates and pretending not to enjoy her sarcasm. Wade repairing things that only just needed repairing because that was how some men disguised concern. Rachel occasionally appearing with fresh dressings or a better idea about anti-inflammatory medication. And always, somewhere in the room, Luna, ears moving, body angled, no longer at the threshold of escape, but not yet free of calculation. Evan noticed something else too. Luna was changing, but not by becoming easy. She still startled at sharp sounds. A dropped spoon could send shock through her frame. A truck hitch clanging out on the road could stop her where she stood. On windy nights, she remained watchful long after he had banked the fire. But now she recovered. Not instantly, not like a normal dog, if there was such a thing. She could come back from alarm. Her breathing slowed sooner. She no longer disappeared entirely after every jolt. She chose, more and more often, to remain in the same room once the danger had passed. And Evan was changing too. He realized it only when Wade leaned against his kitchen counter one afternoon and said, "So are you just pretending this place has become social now? Or have we all missed the meeting?" Evan glanced around as if seeing the evidence for the first time. 2 extra mugs drying on the rack. Nora's scarf draped over the chair back because she'd left in a hurry before Tom drove her home. A bag of groceries on the floor intended for her pantry. Luna asleep in the middle of the room, instead of along the wall. "I didn't notice," he said. Wade laughed. "That's because it happened one tiny annoyance at a time." That was exactly right. Nothing about the shift in his life had arrived dramatically. No speeches, no revelation in the rain, no music. Just repeated acts of showing up until absence would have been stranger. One evening, after Nora had gone back next door and Wade had left with half a slice of pie he claimed not to want, Evan sat on the porch steps watching dark gather over the water. Luna settled beside him, not touching, but close enough that the warmth from her flank reached the air near his hand. The moved wind chime stirred faintly on Nora's porch, a gentler music now. "She says you came to teach people how to slow down," Evan murmured. Luna gazed toward the yard. "You should know," he went on. "This town wasn't exactly asking for lessons." Her ears flicked back briefly, then forward again. Below them, waves worked the rocks with patient force. Somewhere farther along the road, a screen door banged, and a voice called for a child to come in before dark. The sound did not feel threatening here, just part of a world continuing. That was different too. For years, Evan had lived in Blackwater Cove as though the town existed behind glass, visible but not permeable. Now, through the odd alchemy of one damaged dog and one elderly woman with good manners, he found himself inside it. Not entirely. He still preferred silence to company. He still woke too quickly, still scanned rooms before sitting down, still carried old alertness in his shoulders like a second skeleton. But there were cracks in it now. Windows where there had been walls. The next morning, Nora came over with a small jar of marmalade and the cane tapping a new, firmer rhythm on Evan's porch. "I've decided," she said as he opened the door. "That's rarely a harmless beginning. I've decided Luna should be made an honorary member of the neighborhood watch." Evan glanced down at the dog, who had come to stand behind his leg, eyes on Nora's free hand. "I'll let her know." Nora peered around him. "And you should be made to attend one town breakfast a month so no one starts rumors that you're a myth." "That won't happen." "Then every other month." "Still no." "Quarterly." "You bargain like a smuggler." "I was married to a fisherman, same training." He stepped aside to let her in. Behind him, Luna chose not to retreat. Nora noticed and did not call attention to it. That, perhaps, was why so much around her felt safe. Over tea, she said the sentence that would stay with Evan long after the cups were empty. "There are animals," she told him, stirring sugar into her mug though she always claimed not to take any, "that come to be loved. And then there are animals that come to teach people how to love without rushing." Evan looked toward Luna. The dog lay by the stove, not asleep, but resting. Not guarding the room exactly, holding it. "She's teaching me to be quieter," he said. Nora smiled. Same thing. When she had gone, he stood alone in the kitchen with the weight of that thought settling through him. Not rescue, instruction, not salvation, practice. Luna lifted her head and met his eyes. For the first time, the look between them did not feel like recognition of shared damage alone. It felt like the beginning of trust becoming daily enough to survive being unnamed. The storm at the end of March was not the worst the coast had seen. It did not tear roofs away or flood the harbor or knock the power out across half the county. It was, in Blackwater Cove terms, an ordinary hard storm. One of those long Atlantic tantrums that flung rain sideways, beat the windows for hours, and made every loose thing in town speak in its own metal tongue. Even so, Evan prepared for it before sunset. He latched the shed door, brought in the porch lantern, moved the spare wood closer to the stove, checked the rubber bumper on the front door, drew the curtains against the first hard lash of rain. He set the quieter kettle on for tea, then turned it off before it reached full boil, because he did not need it that badly. Luna tracked every motion. Storm weather still unsettled her. The pressure changes alone were enough to keep her ears in constant motion. Add wind-driven noise and the random percussion of branches against siding, and the night became exactly the kind of thing her nervous system had been built to expect and mistrust. By 7, the windows were rattling. By 8, rain struck the roof in heavy slants, and the whole house seemed wrapped in moving sound. Not sharp everywhere, but nowhere fully at rest. Outside, the sea had disappeared into darkness, audible only as a deeper violence beneath the wind. Luna paced once from the stove to the hallway and back. Her mouth was closed, her eyes too bright. Evan sat in the armchair by the fire and did what Rachel had once suggested in passing. He made himself predictable. No sudden shifts, no pacing. No restless energy for Luna to interpret as another threat. He kept one lamp on low, the fire steady, his breathing even. The radio remained off. The dishes had been done before dark. Nothing in the house needed to clang, whistle, or surprise. "It's just weather," he said once when a gust made the porch rail groan. Luna turned toward the sound, body tight. "Bad weather," he amended. "Still weather." She did not believe him, which was fair. Belief was not the point. Presence was. An hour later, a branch scraped sharply down the side of the house. Luna sprang to her feet, trembling, and stood there frozen. Evan did not say her name. He did not reach. After a few seconds, she moved, not to the hallway, not to the door, to the rug at his feet. She lowered herself there with all the tension of a creature choosing the least frightening option among several frightening ones. Her body remained rigid, but she stayed. "That's good," he said quietly. The words were barely sound. The storm worked at the house all night. Wind hit from the north, then east, then straight off the water as if searching for the weak side. Rain burst against the windows in waves. Once, close to midnight, something metallic in the yard knocked hard enough against the fence to make a clear ringing crack through the dark. Luna bolted upright so fast the rug slipped beneath her paws. Her breathing turned sharp and fast, ears pinned back, eyes wide with that terrible flash of inherited panic. Here it is, here it comes, whatever comes after loud things. Evan leaned forward only enough to place both feet flat on the floor. "Luna," not command, marker. She looked at him. "Still here." The words were for both of them. For a moment she seemed split between impulse and choice. The old pattern ran through her body: run, hide, compress, vanish. He could see it. He could almost feel the muscle memory of it in his own bones. Then, in a movement so small another person might not have noticed, Luna stepped closer. Not much. 6 inches, maybe less, and pressed the side of her shoulder lightly against his boot. Evan stopped breathing. The contact lasted only a second before she drew back enough to remain herself, still alert, still afraid, still ready. But it had happened. It had been offered freely in the middle of fear, not after it. He lowered one hand very slowly to the side of the chair, not touching, just there. "You can stay scared," he said. "Just stay." Outside, thunder rolled far offshore, a low, dragging sound rather than a crack. Luna flinched, then looked at him again. She remained where she was. Time passed in difficult increments after that. The kind of night that had no smooth hours, only sequences of endurance. Evan dozed once or twice without fully crossing into sleep. Each time he surfaced, Luna was still there. Sometimes upright, sometimes curled. Once with her head lifted toward the window, listening so hard it seemed painful. Once with her chin resting on the edge of his boot. Toward dawn, the storm began to loosen. Not end, loosen. Wind softened first, losing the hard fist it had had against the walls. Rain thinned next, from assault to steady fall to an irregular dripping from the eaves. The house exhaled slowly around them. Gray light seeped into the room. Evan woke properly with stiffness in his neck and an ache across his lower back. The fire had gone to coals. The lamp still glowed dimly. For a few seconds he stayed still and listened. No immediate impact, no branch scrape, no fence ring. Just gutters draining, and the tired hush that follows a long night. Luna was asleep. Not deeply, not loose and careless the way a dog born into trust might sleep, but asleep enough that her body had curled against the side of his chair with one paw tucked under, and her side rising and falling in a slower rhythm than he had heard from her in storm weather before. He looked down at her for a long time. Then he stood as carefully as he could, banked the stove, and opened the front door. Cold air rushed in, carrying rain-washed salt, wet cedar, seaweed, and the clean, emptied smell that always followed coastal storms. The yard was littered with small branches and blown pine needles. The sea beyond the rise was iron gray and rough, but visible again. Nora's porch curtain had blown sideways in the night, and the moved wind chime hung still as a held breath. Luna came to stand beside him. No hesitation. No pause at the threshold. She stepped onto the porch and looked out over the battered morning with her ears forward and her body quiet. Evan rested one hand on the doorframe and felt, with a sharpness that almost hurt, how different the house behind him was from the one he had brought her into months earlier. It was not quieter only because of bumpers and pads and habit changes. It was quieter because it had been shared. Because someone else's fear had taught him where his own noise lived. Because his routines had become less like defenses and more like accommodations. Because the rooms now held other voices in memory. Nora's dry wit, Wade's impossible commentary, Tom's measured calm, Rachel's practical steadiness. Because Luna had crossed each inch of ground between terror and trust without ever being asked to pretend she had not been afraid. He glanced down. "You could have gone 100 times," he said. It was true. He had never fenced the yard, never tied her, never made departure impossible. On bright afternoons with the door open, she could have chosen distance. After sharp sounds, after bad dreams, after the first terrible storm that had rattled the windows. She could have gone out into the world and kept running until the coast ended. Instead, she had stayed. Not because she owed him anything, because somewhere in the slow accumulation of softened doors, lowered voices, measured movements, and patient days, staying had become less dangerous than leaving. Luna looked up at him. There was no grand revelation in the gaze, no human answer trapped inside animal eyes. Only steadiness, recognition, the quiet presence of a creature who had not become fearless, but had, against every old instruction written into her nerves, chosen attachment anyway. Evan reached down at last. He did not move like men in movies move when music swells, and every broken thing is supposed to mend on cue. He moved with the same care he had learned from her, slow enough to be believed. His hand came to rest lightly against the side of her neck. Luna stilled for one breath, then leaned, only a little. Enough. That was all. The sea kept moving. The town below them would wake soon. Wade would probably show up by noon pretending to inspect storm damage. Nora would tap her cane against the porch and demand to know whether the fence survived. Sheriff Tom would drive past once without stopping, just to check. Rachel might text if the weather report had mentioned fallen branches near the clinic road. Life, in other words, would continue. Not cured, not emptied of sharp edges, not transformed into something painless. Only continued. And for the first time in a very long while, that did not feel like a sentence. Inside, the house held warmth. Outside, the washed world waited. Beside him stood a dog who still startled at too much metal and still chose corners in strange rooms and might always do both. But now, when frightened, she looked for him instead of only for exits. That was no small thing. Evan stood there in the cold morning light with Luna leaning barely against his leg and understood something that had taken him years to earn and months to believe. Peace was not a life without noise. It was not the impossible dream of finally outrunning whatever had once made a person flinch. Peace was this. A storm could pass over the roof. A wind chime could ring. A memory could waken the body like an old injury in wet weather. The world could remain the world. Unpredictable, loud, occasionally cruel. And still, after all of it, there could be a place one did not want to flee. A house, a porch, a town, a life, and someone beside you who stayed too. Evan closed his fingers gently into the fur at Luna's neck and looked out at the sea until the first weak band of sunlight broke under the clouds and touched the wet boards at their feet. Neither of them moved away from it. Sometimes healing does not begin when the fear disappears. It begins when someone chooses to stay gentle with what still hurts. In this story, Luna did not become brave because the world turned quiet. She became safe because Evan made room for her pain without asking her to hide it. That is a lesson many of us need in everyday life too. The people around us may be carrying battles we cannot see, and sometimes the kindest thing we can do is become a softer place for them to land. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear what part stayed with your heart. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe and join us for the next one. May God bless your home with gentleness, and may you find peace in the places where you no longer have to pretend you are unhurt.